Good afternoon. Let me introduce in front of you my PhD thesis titled New Insights on Pharmacokinetic and Pharmacodynamic Changes of Drugs in Varied Gravitational Environments. I am Amir Makolli. I'm a pharmacist and a PhD student here. This is my research team, and our vision is to enhance drug effectiveness in space. While to achieve this, the mission is to conduct innovative research to optimize drug utilization in space travel. We have 3 ongoing projects right now, and the first one is the effect of different gravity levels on pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of drugs. Well, why this one? Because the use of medicines in space travel is steadily increasing, and also the longer journeys that we plan to take, they carry a higher risk of diseases, and this creates a larger need for onboard medication. Also, we already know that microgravity induces such physiological changes, and these could impact the pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of drugs. If these two are impacted, then this can reduce the effectiveness or can cause intoxication, and this can pose a threat to the lives of the crew. That's why our aim is to comprehensively understand the precise effect of varying gravity levels on pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics, and therefore we can suggest necessary interventions. To achieve our aim, we ask this clinical question, which is, do different levels of gravity affect the pharmacokinetics and dynamics of the drugs? And we plan to answer this question, or we answer this through a PICO framework, where the population is healthy humans receiving pharmaceutical treatment. Interventions include space traveling and microgravity models compared to Earth gravity. And so the outcomes will be changed pharmacokinetic and dynamic profile. We hypothesize that drugs under effect of microgravity will experience changes in absorption, distribution, metabolism, excretion, and dynamics of the drug, and this can lead to either inefficacy or intoxication. We did a systematic search in 5 different databases with this particular search key, and with a careful selection out of 10,000 articles, we got down to 25 eligible full texts included. Before jumping to results, let's briefly introduce the outcomes that we're interested in. There's Cmax, Tmax, half-life, and AUC. Cmax is the maximum concentration of the drug in our bloodstream, while the Tmax is the necessary time to achieve this concentration. Half-life is the time needed to decrease the maximum concentration of the drug halfway in our bloodstream, while the AUC, or area under the curve, is the overall drug exposure, which in simpler terms tells us for how much and for how long does the drug stay in our body. Now let's see some results. Here we have the Cmax and Tmax of acetaminophen in short-term and long-term duration of microgravity environment. To have a clearer picture, short-term means 3 days or less, and long-term means 30 days and more. Cmax is measured in micrograms per milliliter, and the normal range for acetaminophen is 8 to 17 micrograms per milliliter, while the Tmax is measured in hours, and the normal range for acetaminophen is 0.5 to 2 hours. Here we can see the Cmax of acetaminophen in short-term duration. We have 4 studies here. All of them are non-randomized studies of intervention and bed rest studies. And we can see here that Cmax is increased for 1.41 micrograms per milliliter, while in the same studies, the Tmax is decreased for 0.43 hours. Even though this result may not sound alarming for our ears, and it's not clinically relevant nor statistically significant, an increasement of a maximum concentration of the drug, while the time necessary to achieve this concentration is shorter, this is a clear sign that the absorption is impacted. And maybe this result is not a huge deal for acetaminophen, but a change like this in drugs with narrow therapeutic window could be dangerous. While for long-term exposure, which these 3 studies are again non-randomized studies of intervention, but in spaceflight studies, we can see surprisingly contradicting results where the Cmax is decreased for 2.03 micrograms per milliliter, while the Tmax is increased for 0.44 hours. And here we can see several drugs pooled and evaluated together, and in all 3 outcomes. So here in Cmax, in Tmax, and in AUC, you can see that we cannot draw a simple conclusion of what's going on here because of the high heterogeneity between the studies, but we can definitely say that each and every drug is behaving differently in spaceflight conditions. So the strength of our research is that this is the first meta-analysis done on the field. We included only studies of intervention, and we also managed to include spaceflight studies. While we, of course, have limitation because the studies are non-randomized, they have high heterogeneity, a low sample size, and there's a limited space equipment. From the results presented before, we can conclude that the microgravity environment appears to influence the drug absorption of acetaminophen. All evaluated drugs seem to behave differently in a microgravity environment. And also from the contradicting results, we can say that the bed rest models may not mimic the effect of real microgravity or spaceflight in the best way for pharmacokinetics. So our implication for practice is that doctors should exercise more caution when they prescribe drugs for potential space travelers and astronauts, and especially for drugs with narrow therapeutic window. The second one, which is for policymakers, they should include dosing recommendations in summary of product characteristics, so dosing recommendations for space travelers. And for research, more studies are needed with different drugs, and probably a new and more accurate microgravity model is needed for pharmacokinetic data. And also, the effect of duration of exposure to microgravity must be further explored. We have finished with data extraction. Right now, we're working on finalizing figures and tables and risk of bias, and started writing the manuscript, the methods part. The second project is the effect of different gravity levels on pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics of drugs in animal models. We won't go into details because of lack of time, but this is sort of the same research with the same background, but we are not focusing on humans, but in animal models. And right now, this project is in the title abstract selection phase. And the third one is investigating the effect of spinal cord injury in drug pharmacokinetic changes in humans. Why is this important? Well, that's because the prevalence of spinal cord injury is increasing. And we can see that in 2019, we had around 21,000 patients with spinal cord injury. Also, spinal cord injury is known that it can induce complex pharmacokinetic alterations. And these could impact the drug metabolism and distribution, but not alone, also drug absorption and excretion. So, to understand these changes is very important and vital because they can pose a risk to the patient's safety, and they can reduce the effectiveness of our medication. So our aim is to uncover the link between the spinal cord injury and drug pharmacokinetic changes, and therefore we can offer insights for improved clinical practices. To achieve our aim, we ask this question: how does spinal cord injury influence the drug pharmacokinetics? So we plan to answer this through a PACO framework, where the population is humans which receive pharmaceutical treatment, exposed to spinal cord injury or not, and the outcomes would be altered pharmacokinetics. We hypothesize that spinal cord injury affects drug pharmacokinetics, and this can potentially influence clinical outcomes. If our hypothesis is true, then we plan to optimize drug dosing strategies in spinal cord injury and enhance healthcare outcomes. To summarize, we have 3 ongoing projects right now. The first one is planned to be submitted on August 2024, the second one on November, and the third one in the January next year. I would like to conclude my presentation with a quote of Isaac Asimov: "The saddest aspect of life right now is that science gathers knowledge faster than society gathers wisdom." So that's our aim here in CTM: bring wisdom to society. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Amir, and congratulations to the nice presentation. Questions from the floor?
So what stage of spinal cord injury are you focused on, the acute phase or chronically injured patients?
Well, the third study is still in the feasibility check, so I'm not quite sure in which stage we're going to focus on.
And do you think along the lines of spinal cord injury being a similar state like the bed rest models for microgravity?
Yeah, that's also one of like an indirect idea or indirect opinion, because bedridden patients or bed rest patients is sort of one of the models which can mimic the pharmacokinetic studies, but the microgravity model, sorry.
Should I pay more attention to my bedridden patients and their pharmacokinetics? in my unit?
Probably yes, yes.
Thank
because
you.
it's, yeah, thank you.
What is the mechanism of the spinal injury and the drug metabolism changes? The connection.
Well, there can be several mechanisms. For example, let's say spinal cord injury patients are like their muscle mass is lower, so when we administer intramuscular drugs, for example, it can impact the absorption and the distribution of that drug. Also, for example, spinal cord injury patients have it affects their gastric emptying, and also that can also impact the pharmacokinetic model, the pharmacokinetic parameters. Another very important part is because this gastric emptying impact a lot of patients with spinal cord injury use laxatives to ease those, and using of laxatives can also interfere with the pharmacokinetics of other drugs, and etc.
So, if I may ask then, regarding your first topic, why not to increase the populations for whole population of bedridden patients, and then subgroup them for the etiology of being bedridden?
Well, that sort of would, in my opinion, would increase a lot the heterogeneity, because the bedridden patients are not always the same, and they can have several different diseases, and each disease can have their own impact in the pharmacokinetics. So they are not quite comparable in that point if we pool everything together. And also studies, pharmacokinetic studies in bedridden patients are not that quite often that can be found.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
And the meta-analysis studies you've done, the number of participants were quite low, around 10
Yeah.
in each studies. And did they look at the metabolizer status of the participants, so slow metabolizers or fast metabolizers?
Well, it's not that the authors of the papers reported something like this in their own papers, but this can be a limitation of spaceflight studies, because there cannot be a huge number of patients in those, let's say, space traveling or flights. So yeah, we have this limitation of low number of studies, low sample sizes, but that's all we have right now.
Do you think it's important to see the metabolizer status of the
Yeah, it may be
participants?
important, because we also saw in the results of several drugs, when they're compared together, we have different behaviors of them, and probably apart from a space flight, also different factors could impact that. Some of the drugs had increased max concentration, and some of the drugs had decreased maximum concentration. But since they didn't report anything on it, we couldn't gather any data from that point of view.
That's what I thought of. Thank you.
Thank you.
One last question then, just out of curiosity, is there any study checking whether hormone supplementation changes in space, like the absorption or?
Well, so our PICO was that we excluded studies that didn't have any pharmaceutical intervention. So I don't know if there's any study that there was any hormone disbalance, but if they didn't take any drugs, then we excluded those studies. And if in these studies that we found, usually there were no hormone disbalance or people who took hormone replacement therapy or something alike. It was usually so those drugs for pain, so painkillers, and drugs in cardiovascular system, etc., but no hormone related.